into the United States in 1905 and settled in Pasadena, California, where he lived in a boarding house with other single Japanese men and worked as a laborer packing oranges. He eventually became a strawberry farmer and married Kiyomi Jisei, who immigrated to the United States in 1916. They became florists and continued to make their home in Pasadena, where they raised 4 children, Yuri, Misa, Henry, and Harvey Sunil. Yasuko and Kiyomi were incarcerated at Gila River Relocation Center, Arizona. Henry Kondo volunteered for the Army in 1943 and served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. These are letters between Henry and his father, one who was about to go fight for the country, and one who was locked up behind bars.
My dear Henry, now you are one American soldiers, and you had great Nippon nation blood in your spirit, so you must be doing your duty for this country. Don't forget, if you have a chance to study hard, your lesson, and make it you great, please take care of your health. You are not very strong, so I worry about it. Must be careful you're drinking water. We wish you have a chance to come over and see us sometime. Please don't worry about your mother and dad. We are old, but we take care of ourselves.
Dear Dad, I'm finally in Camp Shelby, Mississippi. I still don't know what branch of the Army I'll be placed. I'm very sure that I cannot get into the Medical Corps as yet. It might be transferred later. Made out a $10,000 life insurance just in case I don't come back alive. It's very cheap in the Army, premium being just $6.50 a month. If there's anything you need, such as candy, cigarettes, or anything, please write to me. I'll be transferred to my permanent station today or tomorrow, so don't write until I give you my new address. We'll write as soon as possible.
Please join me in thanking L.A. Taiko Ichiza from Nishon Ganji and their members Sarah Gibson-Cortez, Yuki Inoue, and Daniel Yaguchi as we gather to the sound of their drumming and for their participation in today's DOR. Day of Remembrance, what better way to reflect than to hear the actual words written between a father and a son during their incarceration and separation during World War II. The readings you heard were taken from letters written by members of the Yasaku Kondo family. They remind us of the hardships, the fears caused by family separation and incarceration as a result of the unconstitutional Executive Order 9066. Please join me in thanking our actors Edward Hong and Kelvin Han Yi, who will return later for his. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Day of Remembrance Committee, we welcome you to the 2019 Day of Remembrance. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the first DOR held in Los Angeles. Sue Kunitomi Embry attended the actual very first DOR in Seattle in 1968. She recognized the importance of DOR, and the following year, the very first DOR was held here right out on this plaza. Along with Sue's vision, we welcome Phil Shigekuni, who is here in the audience. Phil, where are you? Please stand and be recognized. Phil was a member of the very first planning committee of that DOR 40 years ago. And today he brought me a flyer from the original DOR. So thank you, Phil, for that. At that time, it was a program meant to bring the community together to reflect on the harsh impact and the legacy of the executive order issued on February 19, 1942 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But it was during the 1980s and 1990s, the DORs also served to update the community on the campaign for reparations and to involve them in the continuing fight for redress. Hi, my name is Carrie Marita. Progressives, and Nikkei Progressives just completed our very first quilt, Families Belong Together, and we hope that what you see will inspire you as an individual or as an organization to participate in our second quilt. And our table is over there, and anyone who's interested in signing up to be part of that second quilt, please go over to the table. It is my pleasure to serve as your MC today. My mother's family was from the small farming community of Parlier near Fresno, and they were incarcerated at Gila River, Arizona.
And good afternoon, folks. My name is Hideki Fukusumi, and I am representing Kizuna today. So Kizuna is an organization here in Tokyo that seeks to empower the next generation of leaders through educating them about culture, identity, and leadership, while engaging them with the community. In terms of my background, I am a Shin Nisei, and I'm actually half Japanese and half Thai. So my experience is very different than Carrie's here, but we both share a lot through community work, through Nikkei Progressives and other activities, and so it's a pleasure to be sharing the stage with her today. It's now my honor to introduce the President and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum, Anne Burroughs. In addition to her 25 years of dedication and leadership to issues of social justice and human rights, Ms. Burroughs has recently been elected Chair of the General Assembly of Amnesty International. Please welcome Anne Burroughs.
So, thank you for that very kind introduction. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to our guests, our speakers, our participants, our panelists, and our banner bearers that we will see shortly. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming. I'm so grateful to the organizations, to the individuals who've worked for months to make today happen. It's an enormously important day, not just in Japanese American history, but in terms of the expanse of civil rights history in this country. So a very big welcome to all of you to the 219th Los Angeles Day of Remembrance. A big welcome on behalf of all of us at JANM, our staff, our volunteers, and our leadership. And we in fact have Jean Kanamori in the front, who is representing the Board of Governors of JANM. So our theme for this year, Behind Barbed Wire, Keeping Children Safe and Families Together, could not be more appropriate given the strong racist parallels between the past and the present. 2 years ago, we gathered here in this hall to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066 under the pall of the Muslim bans. And this year we mark its 77th anniversary in the face of a national emergency, barely 24 hours old. Each is an example of executive action that's based on false and misleading information. The incarceration was based on a deliberate lie. A lie that people of Japanese ancestry were a threat to national security. A lie that was fueled by bigotry and prejudice. And this is no different. Asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees are no more a threat to national security than your families were in 1942. The similarities and the parallels are stark. A climate of naked racism, a climate of white supremacy, a false national security threat that incarcerated over 120,000 people 77 years ago. And that today is the impetus for a war that will close our southern borders to people fleeing violence and persecution. The real crisis is the assault on the rights to asylum. It's a fundamental human right that is upheld in the laws of this country, which state very clearly that people have the right to seek asylum from violence and persecution. Instead of affording them the protections that our law and international law requires, they've been demonized and their lives and safeties used as pawns in a political game. The real crisis is the separation of children and their families at the border. The real crisis is the incarceration of between 14,000 and 16,000 children in detention centers across the country. It's this crisis and the policy that gave rise to it that history will surely recognize as a crime against humanity. It remains to be seen whether the Supreme Court will uphold this manufactured emergency, as it did the incarceration and the Muslim ban, and it remains to be seen whether it will once again ignore the underlying racism and prejudice that breathes life into these deeply abhorrent and discriminatory policies. Our job is to make sure that there is no mistaking the tragic and dire consequences of unfettered and irresponsible and unlawful executive action. This is a community that understands it better than most. And I am proud. I am so proud that we've all chosen to make the stand under Janam's roof. So I welcome you all and I thank you for being here.
The theme of this year's program is Behind Barbed Wire, Keeping Children Safe and Families Together. Last September, when the DOR committee began to meet to develop today's program, we were bombarded with news about the harsh treatment of refugees and asylum seekers at our southern border. It was incredibly tough to watch as we saw children forcibly separated from their families and housed in cages. For many of us, it felt too familiar, like many of our parents and grandparents who were torn from their homes and communities during World War II, and whose families were often being separated into different camps. All that our families and new immigrants want is to have a better life for their children and to keep them safe. Executive Order 9066 had a tremendous, life-changing impact on over 120,000 Japanese men, women, and children. It affected many of the following Nikkei generations as well.
4 decades later, in 1988, after our community waged a historic campaign to demand justice and got the support of many other justice-minded individuals and communities, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, and President Ronald Reagan apologized to Japanese Americans for that executive action that was determined to be based on racism, wartime hysteria, and the failure of political leadership. Over 82,000 Japanese Americans and Japanese Latin Americans received a letter of apology from the President and individual monetary reparations. We must continue to tell the Japanese American incarceration story in the hope that it can be a cautionary tale for all Americans about the violation of human rights. With your printed program, each of you received a tag similar to the one given to each person who was incarcerated in 1942. Just like what Hideki's showing. On your tag is the name of a camp. When we call out the name of that camp, please stand. At the end of the roll call, everyone should be standing. If you prefer to stand when a different camp is called, please do so. And before we begin the roll call, we would like to acknowledge any former incarcerees or World War II veterans who may be here today. I do know Don Secchi from the 100th 442nd is here. Don, can you stand? Arkansas. We have Bill Nishimura, who was incarcerated in Poston, Arizona, who is 99 years young. Bill has taken on the task of speaking to many schools about camp. And we realize that with each passing year, we have fewer and fewer who are able to attend. But are there other incarcerees or veterans here today? If so, please stand. Anybody else, please stand. We honor you and we thank you.
We now invite the representatives from Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops from Nishi Hongwanji Buddhist Temple, the Venice Japanese Community Center, Christ the King Lutheran Church, and Evergreen Baptist Church to begin the procession of camp banners. These banners represent the 10 War Relocation Authority concentration camps, DOJ Camp Crystal City, and those who served in the 442nd, 100th Battalion, and Military Intelligence Service. 8,497.
Manzanar, California, 10,046.
Minidoka, Idaho, 9,397.
Poston, Arizona, 17,814.
Rower, Arkansas, 8,475.
Topaz, Utah, 8,130.
Tule Lake, California, 18,789.
The Department of Justice Camp, Crystal City, Texas. And the 100th 442nd MIS World War II veterans, approximately 33,000.
And now the other Department of Justice camps and citizen isolation centers. Alexandria, Fort Livingston, Louisiana. Angel Island, California. Bismarck, Fort Lincoln, North Dakota. Crystal City, Texas. East Boston, Massachusetts.
Ellis Island, New York. Florence, Arizona. Fort Meade, Maryland. If you are able, please remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you. Please be seated.
April 22nd, 1944. Hello, Dad. I have anything to do right now. I'm all packed and ready to go any minute, so I thought I'd drop you a few lines. How is Mom? Take good care of her. Please tell her not to worry. I sure do miss both of you. It would have been swell if I could have seen you before this. Well, anyway, it won't be long before we'll all come back home again. I'm closing a regimental shoulder patch and also one of my old identification tags. Well, I'll be signing off now. Please take good care of yourself. Your son, Hank. April 24th, 1944. Dear Dad, how are you today? Trust that you and Mother are in the best of health. I'm still swell, and I may add that you have nothing whatsoever to worry about, especially when it concerns me. We arrived at our destination safely and sound and find our camp fairly good. Well, it's not as good as Selby, but being the fact that we won't be here too long, I guess it's not going to be too bad. How is everyone in camp? I do hope they're all well. Please give my regards to them all too. Really, Dad, there isn't much to write. Can't tell you where we stationed or anything, which will be valuable to enemy in case this letter is intercepted, so I better call it quits now. Please write my love to you both. Always, your son, Henry. Henry Kondo never saw his parents again. He was killed in action in France on October 19th, 1944. Liberating Bruges and Bifotain in the Vosges Mountains, days prior to the famed rescue of the lost battalion of Texans. In a 1944 letter home, Henry wrote, I can assure you we won't let you friends down. We'll do everything in our power to meet your expectations, even unto death. We're loyal Americans. You know it, but some others do not. We'll show that those don't believe that we're true Americans in every way.
George Aki, 103, on July 4. The last surviving chaplain to serve with the 100th Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team. He was with the unit during fighting in Italy, and it was his lifelong mission to honor the men whose lives were cut short. He served Japanese American churches after the war.
Charles Oide Charlie Hamasaki, 95, on August 30th. A leader of the Terminal Islanders Group and a member of the Planning Committee for the Terminal Islanders Memorial Monument. He also is remembered for his testimony before the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians in 1981.
Ike Hachimonji, 90, on January 17. A longtime volunteer for the Japanese American National Museum who received JANM's Community Award, and with his wife Ruth, the Museum Family Spirit Award. He worked for the LA County Public Health Department and U.S. Agency for International Development.
Mary Kinoshita Higashi, 96, on December 9th. She worked for the California Employment Development Department, was active in La Rambla Presbyterian Church and First Presbyterian Church of San Pedro, and was an active member of the Poston Community Alliance. She was featured in the documentary Passing Poston and was often invited to speak about her camp experiences.
Stone Ishimaru, 95, on September 10. A teacher, media consultant, and archival and historical coordinator for the Los Angeles Unified School District for 46 years. As a photographer since his incarceration at Poston during World War II, he shared his camp photo exhibit at public events throughout Southern California.
Toshiko Joy Nagamori Ito, 93, on July 14, appeared in documentary The Legacy of Heart Mountain, wrote memoirs of Toshi Ito, and was on the advisory council of Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, mother of former judge Lance Ito.
Yoshisuke Jack Kunitomi, 102, on January 20. A Heart Mountain incarceree who served with the Military Intelligence Service in the Philippines and occupied Japan. He worked for the LA Unified School District for 30 years and participated in many Nisei veterans events. The Dodgers recognized him as Veteran of the Game.
Yoshito Yosh Kuromiya, 95, on July 24th. An artist, landscape architect, and World War II draft resistor at Heart Mountain. He spoke out about the constitutional basis for the resistance and appeared in the documentary Rabbit in the Moon and Conscience and the Constitution. He and other resistors received an apology from the JACL in 2002.
Tsutomu Maihana, 98, on June 5. To assist Japanese American families returning to downtown LA from the camps, he founded Onsen Hotel Supply in Little Tokyo in 1946, and later Onsen Hardware. A board member of Little Tokyo Public Safety Association and other community organizations, he received Nisei Week's Pioneer Award in 1990.
Isamu Carlos Arturo Art Shibayama, 88, on July 31st. One of the Japanese Peruvians abducted by the United States government for a hostage exchange with Japan. He fought in the courts for equitable redress for Japanese Latin Americans who were excluded from the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. His story is told in the documentary Hidden Internment.
Jimmy Yamaichi, 95, on May 12 in San Jose. A carpenter, World War II draft resistor, Tule Lake committee member, and co-founder of the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. He was the leader of the Tule Lake Pilgrimage and efforts to have Tule Lake named a National Historic Landmark and National Monument. As a young man, he helped build camp structures, including the Tule Lake Jail that still stands today.
Junwo Jim Yamashita, 93, on December 19, 2017. 442nd RCT veteran and charter member of Americans of Japanese Ancestry World War II Memorial Alliance, For more than 20 years, he worked on the Echoes of Silence CD-ROM and website, which contained the profiles of every KIA killed in action, Nisei soldier, and their Caucasian officers. He received the Japanese American Living Legacy Award in 2011.
Wakako Yamauchi, 93, on August 16 in Gardena. Noted short story writer and playwright, whose plays included And the Soul Shall Dance, 12-1A, The Music Lessons, and The Chairman's Wife. Author of songs My Mother Taught Me and Rosebud. She was a member of Pacific Asian American Women Writers West.
Aiko Hertzig Yoshinaga, 93, on August 5th. A researcher and archivist, she played a pivotal role during the 1980s with the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. The Coram Novus cases of Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Minoru Yasui, and the class action lawsuit filed by the National Council for Japanese American Redress. She discovered documents proving that the J8 incarceration was unjustified.
Thank you, Kay and Richard. Last year, when the DOR committee saw and heard the horrific scenes at our southern border, we couldn't believe it, and yet we could, as this current administration has demonized people from Mexico and Central America, characterizing them as invading hordes of bad people who wish to do us harm. And now we know that the language from this national emergency declaration is one that is flawed and dangerous. As the committee discussed this inhumane treatment, we were struck by the scary parallels with the Japanese American experience before and during World War II. Japanese immigrants to the United States faced severe discrimination and isolation as they tried to set roots here. They were prohibited from becoming naturalized citizens until 1952. Many of them were rounded up by the FBI the day after Pearl Harbor, as the government already had lists of Japanese immigrants whom they suspected of having ties with Japan. Many of those picked up were not allowed to reconnect with their families for months and years.
So for the next portion of today's program, we're fortunate to have Brian Nia here to tell us about the immigrant experiences of Japanese in the US. Brian is the content editor for Densho, as well as the editor of the Encyclopedia of Japanese American History. He will share from his vast knowledge of the history of Japanese Americans. Brian will also be the moderator for our panel of speakers who will address many of the challenges of creating immigration policies that are humane and respect the sanctity of the family and children and keeping the family together. If we could invite Brian and the panelists.
Thank you for the nice introduction and good afternoon, everyone. As has been mentioned, we are commemorating the anniversary of Executive Order 9066 this afternoon. But before Japanese Americans were sent to concentration camps in 1942, there were immigrants who came to this country from Japan starting in the late 1800s. We don't necessarily talk about it a lot in our community, but a fair number came in contravention of immigration laws, some by literally jumping ship and swimming to shore, some crossing the border from Canada or Mexico, some using fairly elaborate fraudulent passport schemes to gain entry. As a racially distinct population that spoke a different language, they were easy targets, scapegoats, for nativists and opportunistic politicians that portrayed them as dangerous, nefarious, inscrutable, and laws were soon passed restricting their immigration, prohibiting them from buying land or from becoming naturalized citizens. These were the parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, maybe even great-great-grandparents of many of us in this room. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, 40-plus years of anti-Japanese agitation culminated first in the roundup and incarceration of immigrant community leaders who were separated from their families, my grandfather in Hawaii being one of them. Then, after that was deemed insufficient, followed by a mass roundup and incarceration of all Japanese Americans living on the West Coast, some 110,000 people. In recent years, we've been hearing unsettling echoes of these stories, using some of the same words, right? Scapegoating, family separation, roundups. And so our panel today includes people who are taking the lead in fighting back against these efforts in a variety of different ways. Each of them will speak briefly about their lives and their efforts that they're working on, and then we'll have a brief discussion afterwards. I will introduce them briefly. There are much fuller bios for all of them in your program. But starting on my right, on your left, I guess, is Reshma Shamasundar, the Vice President of Program Strategy at Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Next, Leticia Bustamante, the Project Coordinator of the Dream Resource Center at the UCLA Labor Center. And she's also a DACA recipient who migrated at age 5 from Tijuana. Amrit Kaur is to her right. She's an undocumented South Asian filmmaker residing in LA. And at the end, Lisa Okamoto, the managing attorney of the Children's Representation Project at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. Our first speaker will be Reshma Shamasundar.
Hi, good afternoon. Great, your microphone's working. I've been so moved by the program this afternoon. I hadn't actually, realized kind of the full extent of the day and what it was intended to commemorate. So both the stories that we heard in the letter, as well as the activists that fought so hard to really ensure that this history is remembered, I think are important introductions to what we're going to talk about now. I actually live just down the street from what was the Tuna Canyon Detention Center, so pass it almost every day and am continuously reminded of our country's abhorrent history, and then remain reminded when I go into work every day and hear on the news and engage in our activism as an organization around immigration. I think that this history is so important because what we are seeing happening both at the border, the treatment of immigrants by the Trump administration is simply horrific. And it's on every front. Over the past 2 years, we're really living in a moment where immigrants are under assault. And the rhetoric in our country is really changing the course of our future history. And it's important for all of us to be fighting every day to change that course and to protect immigrant communities. I'm going to just go over a few facts and figures about specifically Asian American immigrant communities, but I think obviously this is broader and impacts immigrants from countries all over the world, and at the border obviously with tens of thousands of children who've been separated from their families. The human rights crisis that we're seeing at the border, I think, is amongst the most horrific of what we're seeing. It really ripples across our immigrant communities. Undocumented immigrants and those with DACA are particularly, I think, at risk right now, given the uncertainty of the moment. Immigration policy is changing all the time. Fortunately, the courts have chosen at this moment to protect DACA, and those who are eligible for DACA can continue to apply. But many things are up in the courts, and I think we'll have to both continue to advocate and see what happens over the course of the next couple of years. In terms of Asian American communities, almost 40% of the Asian American population actually are foreign-born. We have amongst the largest immigrant populations of any community, and we're the fastest growing. So our voices are very important in this debate, and really standing up for policies that benefit immigrants, not just Asian American communities, but across immigrant communities is really critical. About 16,000 Asian Pacific Islanders are DACA recipients, and APIs comprise 11% of the undocumented population. 82% of legal immigration from Asia was family-based in 2016. and Asians received 41% of the worldwide family immigration visas and are most likely to be caught up in the visa backlog. This is critical because the Trump administration has been attacking our family immigration system. Many of the proposals over the course of the last year are intended to dramatically cut family immigration. And if you have heard about public charge, which basically is a proposal that had been open for comment at the end of last year and now is under review, basically would make it much, much harder for low-income immigrants to reunite with their families. That's really what the Trump administration's immigration policies are about. It's to target the most vulnerable, the poorest, non-white immigrants, and the policies are specifically designed to do that. Let me talk about a few other immigration statuses that are under attack. The temporary protected status, or the TPS program. People from Sudan, Nicaragua, Haiti, and El Salvador are currently temporarily protected from deportation. We recently filed a lawsuit just last week on behalf of Hondurans and Nepalis with TPS to ensure they are protected as well. But the end of the temporary protected status program for these countries would result in the separation of families and many people having to leave after years or decades in this country. We saw yesterday that the Trump administration is calling a national emergency, a so-called national emergency at our borders in order to secure his border wall funding. It's obviously been a major temper tantrum on behalf of our president over the past couple of years that he's not been able to garner that funding, and so instead of stepping back or realizing that this is not something that our country wants, he has continued to inflict pain on our lowest income community members, those in our government who are affected by the shutdown, and of course the rhetoric around the border wall is really only incensing and inflaming the vitriol that we've seen from the anti-immigrant advocates. Detention and deportation. We have seen, obviously, an increase in detention and deportation. You may have also heard about Cambodians and Vietnamese immigrants who have been targeted. There have been some of the largest deportations of Cambodian community members in 2018. We also, along with our partners across the country, have filed a lawsuit to temporarily halt the detention and deportation of Cambodian and Vietnamese immigrants. But their paperwork and their cases are still in process. We'll continue to fight on their behalf. So I think just to close my piece, which really is an introduction, I really would like to invite all of you to request that all of you join the various immigration campaigns that are really fighting back against these most horrific of efforts. The Value Our Families campaign, which is really pushing to protect family immigration. There's the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign, which is fighting back against the public charge efforts that would really decimate family immigration, particularly for those with fewer resources. The Fight for a Clean Dream Act, as well as other efforts at the federal level by critical advocacy organizations to protect our immigrant communities. Thank you.
We had a fifth panelist, Sigrid Toy, who was unfortunately not able to participate today due to illness. Sigrid is a psychologist who's studying the children of German-American internees and a board director of the Tuna Canyon Detention Station Coalition. And she did send a brief piece that she wanted to have read, so I'm going to read that now in what would have been her place. She starts by writing about her father, and she wrote, being a prominent business person in LA Chamber, World Trade Council, and other commercial organizations, got him on the FBI's radar screen. What followed was wrenching.
Hi everyone, my name is Amrit Kaur. I come from Punjab, India. I immigrated here in in 2000 of December, and I came here as a 4-year-old and only with my younger sister and my parents. Now we actually, similarly to Leticia, I am also in a mixed status family where 2 of my parents' kids, myself and my sister, were born in India, but the other 3 are born here as citizens, so they do not have to deal with the whole immigration process and DACA. My parents immigrated to America because in Punjab, India, in the 1990s, there was still arranged marriages. There was still a lot of dowries being passed along, to marry women or to marry younger girls into bigger homes. And so my mother was married off when she was about 22 to my father, but my father's family wanted sons. And so my mom, had 2 daughters in a row, and that was a bad omen for my grandmother at the time. And so the story is that basically my dad's family threatened to kill my mom while my dad was in Dubai doing some transport business work with my uncles. And so when my mom had my younger sister, who's only a year and a half apart from me, they started, threatening her. They actually kicked her out of the house, and so she had to go live with her own family. And in that time, even now actually in Punjab, that's seen as one of the worst things that can happen to you as a woman, is getting kicked out of your in-laws' home and having to go back home because you're seen as an incompetent woman and a woman that can't fulfill her duties. So moving forward, that went on for about a year, and then my mom finally told my dad, who was still in Dubai, saying, hey, look, your family's being very, very aggressive, and I'm very scared for my life. And so once my mom voiced these to my dad, he didn't believe her at first because he thought, they're my own family, how can they even say anything like that to my wife and my kids? And at this point, my dad had never seen us either, actually, because he was still in Dubai. So my dad, I was 2 years old, my dad never had seen me yet, and my mom was here, calling him saying, hey, they just said they're gonna murder me. And once my dad didn't believe my mom actually was such a badass, she gave him an ultimatum, and she's like, I am not ever letting you see your kids, I am not letting you come here and pick me up from my house if you do not get us the hell out of here. Take us to Dubai, take us wherever you need to take us, but get us out of here. And once she said that, I think that's when my dad really realized, okay, no, something is going on. And so he came back to India, and the process went on for about a year where they actually, they created fake passports, they created all these documents. My dad had one of his friends help us. And so once we did all of that, the process went on. Fast forward from, I was born in 1996 to 2000, it took about 4.5 years. We ended up in San Fernando Valley, California, where I've been ever since. Growing up, it was kind of a weird experience because, I knew I was an immigrant, and at the time, 9/11 had just happened a year later. And so I actually went through school. I was one of those kids that went through school for the first 10 years, from 2001 to about 2011 or 12, where I was kind of seen as a class terrorist. So if there was ever a name, or there was ever a emergency or anything at school, even some of the teachers I had in LAUSD would kind of single me out, or they would be very xenophobic. And I just learned the term xenophobic 3 years ago, so now I'm xenophobic. And so it's just interesting, the paradigms of when you're younger and you're experiencing racism, xenophobia, and all these other things, and then realizing it later on in your life, thanks to academia or other folks that come into your life that can mentor you, and seeing hey, no, this shit was not okay, this is what it was. So now, fast forward from my immigration story then to now, somehow, sometime between middle school to high school, I also realized I identify as queer. And so that created a whole other layer of complications with the already big complications I had with being an immigrant, and not having paperwork, and having parents who didn't speak English. It was just always sort of a weird shuffle, to go between, school and then home. Obviously, as we all know, as immigrants and as people of color, we live in sort of dual worlds or multiple worlds of trying to balance everything out. And so while doing that, the whole queer thing happened, and ever since, I've been sort of coming out, in different phases and in different reflective statuses in my life. First I came out as queer to one of my younger sisters, Jaspreet, who's not here today. Sorry, in the space physically, sorry. Because one of my sisters is actually here today, so never mind, y'all. It's just, okay. So I came out to her, and so since then I've been sort of coming out as like either undocumented, as queer, as whatever in different spaces that I enter. And for myself personally, as of I think 2016, I had done a program that Leticia just mentioned. We actually did at the same time. It's called UCLA Dream Summer. And it's hosted by the Dream Resource Center in, actually really close by here. So after I did that program, I actually built my networks farther into immigration. I had never, ever before done any kind of immigration work, ever gone to a rally, or ever gone, knocking on doors, or getting petitions signed, or call-ins. But through that organization, I met a lot of folks who were also like myself, like Asians, or Pacific Islander folks who had an undocumented status, and I didn't know we had existed before this, because I always thought the narrative was Latinx folks who were, undocumented. And through this program, I also learned that there's also Black folks, Caribbean folks, like all types of folks who are undocumented. And that really opened my eyes in terms of social justice and social awareness. And I was, growing up, always a very creative person, whereas some of my siblings are more studious and, had top grades. I was always that one kid drawing, or writing stories, or, filming something with a cheap camera that I got loaned from the high school that I was at. And so my parents were always like, "What are you doing? What is going on with you? Why are you not an engineer yet?" So it was just very interesting growing up. And so in 2016, when I was a part of this program, I realized that in the type of stories I'm making and the filmmaking that I want to be putting out there in the world, I need to have these stories in there. I need to have my story in there, but as well as other folks that I'm meeting. And so for me, in this phase of my life right now, I identify as a South Asian, undocumented queer filmmaker that uses the lens of a camera and a pen to get all of these stories out there, archive these stories that we have, stories that we've seen today, stories that we will always hear. And even us sitting in this space right now will become history one day, and I want to be the person that, has the ability and the privilege and the honor of somehow connecting what's happening today to something that I make in the future. And I think all of our stories are so important, they're so different, and they're so unique, but they're all so connected. And I think for me, what I find fascinating in my filmmaking is finding that connection that we all have as human beings in the beginning, and then finding some sort of intentional and intersectional way of bridging the gaps between all of our different communities. And right now I am a part of an organization called Satrang Los Angeles, which is for queer South Asian folks. And I'm actually also a core organizer and member of an organization called Uplift Los Angeles, which is actually housed under Reshma's organization called Advancing Justice Los Angeles. And so we've actually, in the last few years, done a lot of, and with Uplift, we've done a lot of work with, going to DC for the Clean Dream Act mobilization, working with organizations such as NACSEC, the Undocumented Black Network, UCLA Dream Resource Center. So a lot of the folks that I am currently with who are also undocumented APF folks, we're trying to now this year be very intentional with our organization and create even bigger connections and creativity. Like this summer we'll be hosting an Expressions night that will be hosted with Satrang Los Angeles, hopefully Tuesday Night Cafe, if we can get it to happen with them, that happens right there. So yeah, that's what I'm doing in my life right now.
Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Okamoto. I'm a managing attorney at Immigrant Defenders Law Center. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel and for everybody for sharing so far. I'm going to speak a little bit about what it's been like to work with asylum seekers. So, Immigrant Defenders Law Center is a nonprofit law firm. We're based out in downtown Los Angeles, but we have an office in Santa Ana, in Riverside, and we are also currently seeking staff to house our San Diego office, hopefully that in response to what's going down at the southern border. Immigrant Defenders Law Center, our mission is to implement what's called a Universal Representation Program in immigration court. So, as you've already heard, an undocumented person or a person who's seeking legal status, that can come in many shapes and forms. We represent those who are forced into deportation proceedings. So if you are ever talking to anybody who has immigration court, that means that that person is in deportation proceedings. And when a person is forced into deportation proceeding, that means that while they are in front of a judge, they are always against a government-trained attorney. Regularly, when people, in other contexts, when people think about lawsuits or court, there's the one side and the other side, and you may or may not have an attorney. That happens a lot in family court or probate court. But immigration court is very unique in that while it's a civil proceeding, you are always going to be against a government-trained attorney. And even though you are always against a government-trained attorney, if you cannot pay for an attorney, you will not get an attorney. And that includes everybody, including children. And so we were started, we're fairly new, we started back in 2015 so that we can respond to this great need of people needing attorneys during their immigration proceeding, including their asylum proceeding. And then, we were pushing for this movement, and not a lot of people were listening to us. And then on November 9, 2016, when everybody woke up the following day after the election, suddenly people realized that there is a very big vulnerable community that perhaps needs a little bit of help. So what happened was suddenly the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, also the City of Santa Ana, all these local governments started responding, and we began on seeing a universal representation program being started in different detention facilities that are throughout Southern California. So our goal is so that no person in deportation proceeding is standing alone in court. I specifically manage the Children's Representation Program, which is a program that represents unaccompanied minors. So I don't know if people are aware or have heard, but back in 2014 there was a surge of unaccompanied minors, children who were coming here by themselves without a parent or legal guardian, fleeing violence from Central America, largely Central America, some also children from Mexico. There were about 60,000 children coming through the border per year, and the courts were flooded with all these kids in court. And like I said, because the government will not pay for attorneys, they didn't have attorneys in court either. So at the time, my position was to respond to that, and I started representing these children who were almost all asylum seekers. Through that process, that was 4 years ago, and now I continue to represent asylum seekers, including those who have now, are over 18, and our office has increased in capacity to represent all asylum seekers that are coming through the border. Not just asylum seekers, but just in the context of today's conversation, I wanted to focus on that a little bit. Probably one of the questions that I get often in my line of work is, one, I'm tired, yes, but two is how have things changed in the last couple of years? And the panelists have already touched on this, but the rise in detention has skyrocketed. So what that means is those who are here seeking asylum, who have no criminal background whatsoever, even in their home country or here, you are likely to be detained. And that was what started the family separation crisis last year. All those people who were at the border, families, children, mothers, single men who were here trying to support their family, but also fleeing violence because they were the ones targeted in their home country. They came to the border to seek asylum, and they were subsequently detained, and they were separated because there at least is a law that children can't be detained, so they separated the parents from the children. What happened then was the detention centers got flooded. And all the immigration detention centers no longer could accept people, so what the federal government decided to do was to place approximately 1,000 people in the Victorville Bureau of Federal Prison. And so there were about 1,000 people who were transferred into the Victorville Federal Prison. Actually, half of those were Sikh asylum seekers, and the other half were about Central American. There were a couple of people from different parts of Africa as well seeking asylum. But they were all held in these federal prisons without an access to an attorney, without access to an immigration proceeding, without access to interpreters, with terrible food conditions. They were provided rotten food. They were not allowed to go outside. So Immigrant Defenders Law Center, represented by the ACLU, sued the Department of Homeland Security, and we gained access into Victorville to speak to these asylum seekers, to do intakes, and to try to get them out as soon as possible. And I think that was my, at least, personal interactions with those who recently arrived from the border, interacting with asylum seekers who were just starting their process. And I can say across the board, every single man, and they were all men because it was a male facility, but every single person that I spoke to, what they said is, I just wanted to do things legally. I presented myself at the port of entry. I can't believe I'm in shackles, in a jumpsuit, and they're treating me like a criminal, and I don't know why, and I don't know when I'm getting out of here. And that was repeated over and over again. I think I've spoken to at least 100 people through that time that we were doing the intake process. And it was really eye-opening as to, you know, the justification, the consequences when national security is used as a justification to detain people. Luckily, all those people are now out now from Victorville. Unfortunately, many of them are now detained in immigration detention centers, but at least they do have access to immigration court to fight for their asylum proceeding. But it was just an eye-opener. And the second time that really kind of shook me to the core was, you know, when there was the migrant caravan that was coming from largely Honduras, but also El Salvador, through into Mexico. There was pretty much a stop on anybody trying to access the port of entry to seek asylum. So at Immigrant Defenders Law Center, we went down to Tijuana and then to Mexicali to do Know Your Rights training to the asylum seekers, to try to get information on how it is for these people to seek asylum at the port of entry. My colleague and I, we went down to different park areas where there were 1,000 people meeting there, tried to understand what was the legal process to seek asylum into the United States. And it was frustrating that that they couldn't. What happened, at least on the Mexicali border when I was down there, was that they were requiring all asylum seekers into the United States to prove that they have lawful entry into Mexico to ask for asylum into the United States, which is impossible because Mexico the Mexican government just did not provide any sort of legal entry to any of the caravan members. And therefore, all these people, 1,000 people, were stuck trying to seek asylum, but were stuck really not in their home country, not in the place that they were seeking refuge, but in these border towns where there were high crimes, and there were children and family who were trying to figure out what it was for the best way for them to access some sort of quality of life. That is still continuing today. In Tijuana, there's a waiting list system that's done paper and pen on a paper. People are prevented from legally going into the port of entry to seek asylum. In fact, about 2 days ago, the first people who actually were able to go through the port of entry to seek asylum were shipped back to Mexico because there's a new regulation that requires those who are wanting to seek asylum to the United States to wait in Mexico, including Mexican nationals. So Mexican nationals who want to seek asylum from Mexico have to wait in Mexico for their asylum proceeding in the United States. So there are all these challenges that have been set in place: detention, just logistical barriers that are preventing people who are fleeing violence that the United States had active involvement in creating in the first place. That is all in the name of national security. And I've been thinking about kind of the parallels of the internment camps that happened during World War II and now. And when I talk to these people on the border in Mexicali, you know, they were all tired. They were exhausted people. They were tired. There were families. There were children. There were men who were just trying to figure out a way to provide the best thing for their family. They were, you know, holding on, making sure that they don't break. You know, they were really, really fighting hard not to break. But the last thing in my mind was criminal, right? Like it just did not even occur to me that my safety was or anybody's safety, except for maybe the children's health. It was really cold down there. People were getting flus left and right. I mean, so there was a health safety concern. But just interacting with these people in masses, there was never a moment where I thought, okay, these, like the thought terrorist did not even cross my mind. And so I think there are probably a lot of people whose experience were parallel to that, where, you know, when they were in camp, they were considered as some sort of enemy of the state, yet the day-to-day people that you interact with face-to-face, you couldn't believe that a government would treat people in such ways. And so my hope is that that this blanket justification of national security be challenged on a daily basis, and that we uphold the law that anybody who is here, who's physically here in the United States, regardless of whether if it's in the port of entry, they do have a right to seek asylum, to protect it as much as possible, so that we can at least have some sort of moral ground when we're talking about the immigration system, because it's true, the immigration system is broken, but you know, we have to start somewhere, and apart from like economic reasons, it makes sense for people to be able to work here economically. I hope to also fight for the moral reason that if somebody's here fleeing from a country that cannot protect them, that we at least provide an extended hand.
What I wanted to ask the panel to start with was, you know, given this history that Japanese Americans shared of incarceration and also immigration, I'm wondering what role Japanese Americans can or should play, given the histories that they carry with them.
I can start. I was actually at a different organization, the National Immigration Law Center, when the Muslim ban came down, and we were one of the parties that sued. As part of that campaign, actually, Japanese Americans were very active in speaking out about how the Muslim ban was so parallel to, you know, the executive order during World War II, and not just the parallels, but really, you know, the inhumanity of how individuals are seen, the stories of families being ripped apart, and Japanese Americans were actually very active during the, you know, kind of providing information during the court case. And so I think specific engagement around, you know, the issues that are so parallel to what we saw during World War II. I think the separation of children at the borders is, I think, another opportunity. And I think it can, you know, it can be as simple as a call to your legislator or Congress member to as engaged as really being active in a campaign and providing the voice and stories of, you know, your family and, you know, the history that they've endured, and the importance of Japanese Americans speaking up, particularly in this moment when we're replicating the worst of our history.
I think it's important to continue to tell these stories, to keep reminding folks that this has happened before, that, you know, this is not the first time that the United States does something like put kids in cages or camps or, you know, whatnot. Something that was mentioned at the beginning of the program, and I would just like to highlight, is that the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians released a report, and they determined that the decision to incarcerate people was based on race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Like, are we going through this again? Yeah, we are. Right, so again, I think it's very important to remind folks this happened before. It's literally happening again. It's just a different group of immigrants. Like, we need to continue to tell these stories and remind folks what was done and what needs to be done, and sharing these stories is a great way to do that.
Thanks for sharing that, both of you. I second everything you just said, and also, if you're not very politically active, the best thing you can do, just in any case, any scenario that's going on, is to definitely know your representatives. Know who is repping you, because these are the people that you should be calling, sending emails to, sending letters to, asking everybody around you to sending stuff to them. And if you are part of organizations or you go to a university like myself, I attend CSUN, if you are involved in organizations, as I said, universities, whatever, mobilize. You need to mobilize your people. Start from the ground. Get all the people that you know close to you, like your family members, your friends, whatever. Tell them what's going on. If you yourself are not very familiar with the issues that we're talking about, or if you don't feel like you can comfortably call someone yourself, ask a friend who is involved in an organization, such as the ones that we're all involved in. Check online. There's always stuff on Facebook too. Like, we're always mobilizing on social media. We're always sending out emails or whatever. Get on newsletters. Get on all these different sorts of emails, because as obnoxious as they sometimes can seem and very, like you can feel burnt out with getting so many emails from different organizations to sign this petition, sign that, sign this. It's very, very important to do so, or at least to forward it to folks who do have the capacity to do so. And then lastly, while you're doing all this important work from the ground up, take care of yourself, because you're the only person that can take care of yourself truly, because you know yourself, and also we need you. As community members, it's very, very important to notice that sometimes it's easy to keep going on and on and on when we're so passionate about a topic, when we're so fueled, we're like, oh, this is going on, I need to be here, I need to be here. But what use would you be to yourself and others if you're just so burnt out that you can't even provide guidance or help or comfort to those closest to you? So take care of yourself.
As a Japanese American myself, I think that, and I don't mean to generalize the community at large, because, over the several of the generations, Japanese, what is a Japanese American? I feel like there's a panel about that in Little Tokyo every week. So I don't mean to overgeneralize, but I do think that we are a unique community in that we have this history, but we also currently are privileged groups of people. And so I believe that as Japanese Americans, what we should do is recognize that privilege and utilize it to those who can benefit from it. And what do I mean about, money? I mean, donate to places, donate, one of the most heartbreaking or frustrating and heartbreaking things about the immigration system is that even if somebody is deemed not a risk or a danger to society or a flight risk, so somebody who might just flee and not go to court. Even if a judge determines that person is not a flight risk, is not a danger to society, that person still has to pay a high bond, so money, in order to be released from immigration detention. And you have to pay that up front. It's not like a piece by piece you can pay. And the minimum is $1,500, there is no maximum. I've seen bonds of $50,000. There are different nonprofits that are looking for example, donations so that people can attend their immigration proceedings. We all know that rent is too high here in Los Angeles. Immigration court here is in Los Angeles, but nobody can afford to live in Los Angeles, so that means so many people who have immigration court proceedings live far, far away and cannot get to court without help. I would ask to our community to really acknowledge your own privilege, realize the sacrifices that people have made in the past so that we could be here today, and utilize that to uplift others who are currently in need. But do that consciously as well. Don't do that in a savior way. We don't save people, people save themselves, but what we can do is empower others and figure out a way to do that.
Thank you, everyone, and please give the panel another hand.
Thank you, Brian, for moderating the panel, and to the panelists for reminding us how immigration laws and policies have discriminated against minorities throughout U.S. history. From our experience during World War II, Japanese must stand up and speak out to show we care how the government is treating those people seeking better lives for their children and families.
Also, I want to say thank you to our panelists for calling to attention the many pressing concerns that our immigrant communities are experiencing and ways we can support them. We also invite you to, at the end of the day, take a look at your programs. There's a call to action from every single organization that's part of the committee, and these are great, quick ways that you can get involved and do some real support work for the community. As the Japanese American community remembers what happened to us during World War II, we seek to ensure that what happened to us never happens again. But when we see the current administration's relentless push for Muslim ban and demonizing refugees and asylum seekers, we know that we must speak out and let our concerns be known. There is a national network of Japanese Americans called Never Again Is Now that is coordinating efforts to speak out. As part of this effort, Nikkei progressives here in LA just completed their Families Belong Together quilt, which you can see over on my left, your right-hand side over there, it's up against the wall. This quilt is a tangible show of support for immigrants and refugees who suffer from detention, family separation, and harsh conditions at the border. Funds have been donated as a part of this move here, and all the money donated will go to detainees and families who have been separated.
On this day of remembrance, let us remember how Japanese Americans felt totally devastated and alone during World War II, and how difficult it was to raise their families after the war. They had to carry guilt and shame for things they were blamed for, but had nothing to do with.
I wanted to erase that part.
I felt ashamed because I loved my parent. I also loved America. I get goosebumps when I sing the Star-Spangled Banner. I believed what our teachers taught us about what a great country America is.
Anti-terror plans to isolate certain places of origin.
Pole Project Ensemble, in partnership with NCRR and JACCC, presents Tales of Clamor, a play that links past and present, analyzes the journey of 40 years of silence, and utilizes the road to redress as a case study for the collective clamor necessary for change today.
And he's mad, wondering why I didn't say anything. He says, how could you just go like sheep? No protest. And I told him, we don't like talking about camp. And then I don't say nothing. A lot of us, we just don't. I know he's angry. Why now he's angry at me. Maybe if I tell what happened to me, he stop being angry at me and be angry for me. And he should know everything. So, here, can you help me write this?
Tales of Clamor takes the audience on a cathartic journey through mixed media, theater, circus arts, and archival footage of the 1981 Commission hearings. We're excited that Tales of Clamor will make its world premiere as the inaugural production of the new black box stage of the Aratani Theater.
And really I wanted to speak more on the impetus and the reason for doing this project in the first place was really to connect the dots. We didn't set out to write the redress story per se. We wanted to think about how in the present time we are facing the same things that our community faced way back when, right? family separation, detainment, deportation, right? The destruction of community, pitting the good American versus the bad American. And so that's what I think I'd like to have us think about today, is connecting the dots, giving support, and giving time and money, not assuming that we know what it means to be a good ally right now, but to really ask questions and to work directly with people directly affected, our neighbors, our friends, our family, right? Folks in the immigrant community, in the Muslim community, and I really just want to keep us thinking about how do we connect the dots? How do we connect the dots and act accordingly, right? And how do we ask more questions so that we can move forward? How do we spend our money? And really, I just want to echo what the panel just said and just have us remember to give of ourselves, our time, our money to organizations like the UCLA Labor Center, to projects like Dream Summer, all of these things that really bring people together to heal a little bit, to ask us and give us time to take care of ourselves and each other. I give myself permission.
I give myself permission
to connect the dots.
to connect the dots.
I give myself permission
I give myself permission
to use my voice.
to use my voice.
I give myself permission
I give myself permission
to be a little bit louder.
to be a little bit louder.
I give myself permission
I give myself permission
to show up for others now.
to show up for others now.
Okay, let's connect the dots and keep moving. Thank you so much.
We welcome you to stay and enjoy wonderful refreshments, also brought to you by my multi-talented co-MC here, and Carrie's kitchen crew, all over there. Always volunteer yourself now to provide these wonderful refreshments for you today. To leave you with one last thought today, please think of today's DOR program to help remind us about standing up and speaking out for the safety and protection of all children and families. Leave today with a renewed commitment to making sure our government is called out for injustices it is committing against humanity, because never again is happening right now. Thank you so much, and please make sure to visit all the tables of our sponsoring organizations all around the outside of the room.